Hello, people. I'm recording this in the middle of a hallway, so I'm a little I'm a little scared, but we're gonna do it anyways. Twilight, a story about love, deception, and your best friend falling in love with your daughter. Now that was an interesting one. The series grossed $3.5 billion in the box office. The sequel, New Moon, amassed $72.7 million on its opening night, breaking records as the biggest midnight screening. But you don't need me to talk about the numbers. Unless you've been hiding under a rock for the past decade, you know that Twilight is poppin'. The kids will tussle over Edward or the other dude, what's his name? Personally, when Twilight first hit the scene, I was too young to really care. I think I fell asleep while watching in the theater one time. My family are Twilight stans. My mom just recently spent a whole night marathoning all of the movies. This is American culture. So while they were going to see the latest Twilight, I was binging Annoying Orange.
Hey, Apple! Hey, Apple! Hey, Apple! Hey, Apple! Apple!
You Zoomers remember that one? The kids still love Twilight. Whenever I say kids, I mean millennials already. Oh no, what is this? Twilight was riding high even before the movies came on the scene, with the original novel series hitting records as the biggest selling novels of 2008 and spent 235 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Like every cult classic, the series went from novel notoriety to blockbusterness. A stay-at-home mom was able to bring this complicated world of fantasy and trivial love triangles that honestly ruled culture in its prime time into the everyday frame. After the rise of Twilight, we see more popular vampire media, specifically shows, start to pop up, continuing this trend. Vampire Diaries, American Horror Story, and recently Shadowhunters. Shows where we can all swoon at hot, sexy actors like Ian Somerhalder. So this explosion of a trend that has honestly fizzled out in the last few years, we're still being shown on CW, but who watches them anyways? Yet the nostalgia of these shows and movies still live rent-free in our minds. Yet historically, the symbol of the vampire, this creature that we swoon over, isn't very sexy or hot. In fact, it reveals an aspect of our lives that would make most of us very uncomfortable. Vampire metaphor in literature has a history of representing a darker perspective of the statutory relationship between men and women, predators and prey. That blood-sucking is not blood-sucking, let me just say that. What if I crushed all you 20-somethings who are still fantasizing over Edward after 10 years? What if I told you that Twilight might be hiding something, that the context surrounding it might be more eerie than it's letting on? This Twilight era carried behind it a trend of other media that emulated it. Are those shows continuing a dangerous narrative? So join me as we dissect the history of the vampire metaphor and whether modern vampiric media reflects the original horror. It's time to expose Twilight. For all the Twilight stans, don't take this too seriously. It's just fiction at the end of the day. Okay? Are we good? Okay, let's move on. First, let's educate ourselves on what exactly is the history of the vampire metaphor. It began in Victorian England with Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1897. The story consists of this. Dracula is currently living in Transylvania, where he has shredded apart and sucked the life out of, so he's like, why don't I go somewhere else and do the exact same thing? So he chooses England. We'll dive into the location and what all of that means a little bit later. Along his way, he manipulates and imprisons people mentally, even the people who are helping him. Some are able to escape and others are not so lucky. One of those prisoners, Lucy, is a character that deserves a little bit more focus. She herself is an attractive young lady to several suitors, winds up under Dracula's influence and falls ill. People around her are struck by this. They can't figure out what her ailment is, and eventually she turns into a vampire. Another woman in the story, Mina, later in the novel learns that she has a mental connection to Dracula, which eventually helps the main protagonist defeat him. So I was diving deeper into this on SparkNotes since I am very openly anti-reading, which probably hasn't done me any good.
Well, I think with our powers combined, we could throw something. We could throw. I can't read.
I decided to learn more about the symbols of the book since that is what we care about. There is a part in the book where one of the protagonists drives a stake through Lucy's heart in order to return her to her natural state and get rid of the demons. The language and tone that Stoker chooses to use during this is noted as being very sexual. Take the stake in your left hand, ready to place the point over the heart, and the hammer in your right. Then when we begin our prayer for the dead, I shall read him. And he struck with all his might. The thing in the coffin writhed, and a hideous blood-curdling screech came from the opened red lips. The body shook and quivered, twisted in wild contortions. The sharp white teeth jammed together till the lips were cut, and the mouth was smeared with the crimson foam. But Arthur never faltered. He looked like a figure of Thor as his untrembling arm rose and fell, driving deeper and deeper the mercy-bearing stake, whilst the blood from the pierced heart welled and spurted up around it. His face was set, and high beauty seemed to shine through it. The sight of it gave us courage, so that our voices seemed to ring through the little vault. And then the writhing and quivering of the body became less, and the teeth champed, and the face took quivering. Finally, it lay still. The terrible task was over. I didn't find this super sexual, but maybe for the Victorian era it was. I can see how Arthur's behavior, how he drives the stake, make me more equated to sex. I don't know. However, Sparknote made a comparison between the stake and a pee-pee, and goes on to say that Stoker purposely chose Arthur, who was Lucy's fiancé, as the one to drive it. I mean, Sparknote doesn't lie. Another nod to sex that Stoker makes is the name of the ship Dracula uses to ride to England. Its name is Tsarina Catherine, who, a reference to the Russian Empress, who was notorious for her promiscuity. Sparknote says that this reference is particularly suggestive of the threat that hangs over Mina Harker's head. Should Van Helsing and his men fail, she'll be transformed to the same creature of appetites as Lucy. Stoker chooses several moments, it seems, in the book to make references to promiscuity and sex. England, men, women? Isn't this beginning to sound a little familiar? If you're familiar with world history or pop culture in general, you will know that the infamous serial killer Jack the Ripper had horrified the district of Whitechapel just a decade before, killing 5 known women, with other murder cases having a possible link. Connection between Dracula and the murders are debated, but when I read the story, I couldn't help but link the two. It seems to be inspired, if not a response to the murders. Lemino has an exceptional video on Jack the Ripper if you want to learn more about the murders and why this could have influenced Dracula. After you watch this video, of course. You're my prisoner. Those symbols and references only strengthen the image of an evil man whose sole mission it is to manipulate and suck the life from young women. A man who does that cannot be human. There are more examples of novels that incorporate this metaphor. Daisy Miller, a story roughly about a young woman whose desire to date older men kind of backfires on her. Winterbourne, the older man she becomes interested in, is enamored by her but leads her on. Shortform notes that this is because he is both attracted to and repulsed by her. While Winterbourne isn't actually a vampire, he sucks the life and energy out of her just like one. If I recall correctly, the Lemino video mentioned that law enforcement didn't want authors or journalists to write about the murders in Whitechapel directly, and on top of that, the Victorian era was a time period where sex was avoided. English society was fascinated by it, yet frigid. The topic of sex was used as a way to control society, to oppress and rule them. In fact, Queen Victoria was reported to have said, "Lie back and think of England," after her daughter got married. Okay. As you may be able to guess, if Victorians had this response to sex in general, they weren't very fond of female pleasure. Honestly, it's like 100 years later and we're still not. My ghosties. Talking about it was considered distasteful, and the subject horrified most women. Now I see how our education system failed us. The tones of this attitude towards sex, especially the lie back and think of England thing, are beginning to become concerning. Like, why would you send your child out into the world when it's fine? It's over, I think. Here's some fun, disturbing facts I found from an article. Once married, and only then, it was your duty as a wife to permit to your husband to lie with you as often as he desired. Many adults didn't know sex caused pregnancy. In the 18th century, doctors even went so far as to describe mild sicknesses as a direct cause of overmasturbation, including a cause of madness. If counseling didn't work, regular punishment might include caning or thrashing, common within boys' schools. Chastity devices, implement corrections, potions, and even religious rituals were performed to cast out the offensive semen demon. Were they fapping in class? They were horrified because they knew it caused diseases, yet celibacy was discouraged. Make up your mind. Now Now we're all educated on the historical context for the creation of the vampire, its origins in Dracula, and the real-life events that inspired it. The vampire is not the first of its kind though. A lot of supernatural creatures and phenomena we read about or watch have hidden meanings, like ghosts for example. They are historically presented in stories to teach the main protagonist a lesson, like in Muppet's Christmas Carol, where Marley and Marley, that is permanently burned into my head. The doppelgangers, like in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which are placed in stories to show the duality of humanity. People that are objectively good can do bad things also. All of these supernatural metaphors further explore and articulate complicated human facets through representations our dumb human brains can comprehend. The vampire was there to fill a gap, to make sense of a horrifying time in history, to expose a side of humanity that humanity wasn't really ready to expose. The question is, does the vampire metaphor still hold the same weight as it did in the Victorian era? I think the most popular example of a vampire novel comparable to Dracula is definitely Twilight, as I mentioned earlier. Already, just by observing the movies and novels for both, there is a clear difference in the way the creature is portrayed. They went from dark, ugly predators to beautiful, misunderstood creatures, like sharks. They have similar teeth too. Just as we discussed a little bit of Bram Stoker's ideas behind the Dracula novel, we will do the same for Stephenie Meyer. So who is she and how did she come up with this novel that would turn into a slightly cringy film series? I'm trying to be nice when I say that. Meyer, a stay-at-home mom, was running into a bit of burnout with her everyday life when she got a dream. It was two people in a kind of little circular meadow with really bright sunlight, and one of them was a beautiful, sparkly boy, and one was just a girl who was human and normal. They were having this conversation. The boy was a vampire, which is so bizarre that I'd be dreaming about vampires, and he was trying to explain to her how much he cared about her, and yet at the same time, how much he wanted to kill her. Interesting. She started to record this dream over and over again, and then she played around with the idea and the characters, and before she knew it, she had a book. The even more impressive thing is that she was never a writer before this. Like, how rare is it that a noob gets it right in the first try? That would be like me going into Valorant right now and getting an ace. I should really stop making gaming references in these videos. You people do not know what I'm talking about. Just from this interview, we can already tell that the vampire for Stephenie Meyer was just a creature that struggled with relationships and how that collided with their reality, an outsider. An essay on the portrayal of vampires by UK Essays phrases Meyer's shift of the creature perfectly. As with the characters of the vampire, Meyer challenges the image of the old vampire by means of changing their purpose. Part of the story revolves around what it means to be a vampire. By giving each vampire a special gift, it creates this contrast or divide in the vampire's meaning. We see Edward specifically struggle with this. He describes himself as dangerous or the best predator, while also having the gift of reading people's minds. He shows compassion and love for Bella, or really the entire human race, since he follows the Cullens' philosophy of not drinking human blood, yet he has this pent-up self-hatred for what he has become. The vampires can, in several ways, provide a metaphor for sexuality and power, but can also represent alienation inflicted by society. Societies add towards illness, its definition of good and evil, and can even reinforce individual feelings of obsession, free agency and choice, self-control, sacrifice, and faith. As our society has changed, so has this metaphor, which is kind of neat. Beginning with Anne Rice's The Vampire, we see this shift in what it means to be a vampire and how it's portrayed in media. Rice used the metaphor in a similar way as Dracula, but instead of the vampire being men who suck the life out of women as a symbol for disease or AIDS, and how society perceives that. Once again, shifting with the times. Not that our society doesn't still struggle with female autonomy and sexual predators, but what people want to read or explore in literature has changed to a message of alienation. A little bit more of a wholesome message, but an important one nonetheless, and one that a lot of humans can identify with. Having this beautiful purpose or gift but being clouded by your own perception of yourself, whatever that looks like for you. The concept of the other is one that we see being explored recently in not just literature, but television and film. The other can look several different ways. It's an adaptable subject. It can come in the form of racial othering or come in the form of sexual and gender discrimination, fat shaming, down to the kid who in that cheesy teen flick who everybody hates for some reason. We see it everywhere, and something you notice is that the prominence of its inclusion happened around the same point as Anne Rice's The Vampire. In the 80s, we had works of art like Madame Butterfly, which focused on Orientalism and maybe even internalized homophobia, to other traditional art that focused on the AIDS epidemic. It's kind of cool to see that the shift in society's attention towards how divisive we are started around the civil rights movement, when not just Black issues were brought up, but issues regarding gender equality and the treatment of minorities like Filipinos. All the ways we hate each other and divide ourselves were brought up to the forefront of our society. There was no more ignoring or slapping a band-aid on it. People were ready to face it head on. This is kind of making me like Twilight. What the hell? So if our thoughts and beliefs were going to change, it makes sense that the vampire should be brought along with those changes. I think Edward sums it up perfectly. Just because we've been dealt a certain hand, it doesn't mean we can't choose to rise above, to conquer the boundaries of destiny that none of us wanted, to try to retain whatever essential humanity we can. This was her first time writing. I just know she lying. She got this far. Thank you for allowing me to make videos about things I'm thoroughly interested in. I didn't know how this video topic would pan out when I came up with it, but it's actually pretty interesting to explore how this creature has evolved, that we view on the surface level has a deeper message, and how that message has evolved with the events of history. Maybe it's because I really like history, but I just think it's so cool. Like when I heard that Anne Rice used it as a metaphor for AIDS, my mind was blown. It's like combining the sexuality part of Dracula and the alienation of Twilight. Most importantly, I hope that I can educate you all about this, because I don't think a lot of people know what the vampire's original meaning was. So I hope you enjoyed this short video essay, learning with me and all that, and I hope all you gamers will join me later this month to talk about FNAF. Okay, bye!